from NJ.com. This is Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast. We're talking Big Blue football all year round.
Welcome aboard, Giants fans, to episode 91 of Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast right here on NJ.com. I'm Joe Giglio, joined every week, as always, by James Cratch and Dan Duggan. They cover the Giants for NJ Advanced Media. And now we are done. The NFL draft is in the books. The Giants, I think the word I would use probably is had one of the more interesting drafts of any team. Some angst, some anger, some people upset, ex-players upset what the Giants did, some questions about what they did, which is kind of par for the course for Jerry Reese drafts. James, we'll start with you. After what I'm sure was a long and kind of winding and crazy draft weekend, the Giants come out with 6 players, a whole bunch of undrafted free agents, which we could touch on later. But it started in the first round with a surprise. The Giants found themselves a quarterback. We'll get into it all, but what was your big takeaway? Like when you walk away from this Giants draft, James, what's in your mind right now?
I thought they had a so-so draft. There's a lot of question marks to me for a lot of these picks. I mean, you start with the first-round pick. I mean, it's well documented, my thought, and we'll get into Evan Engram, but that was a pick that surprised me. Then you go, you pass up a guy, Zach Cunningham, who you apparently were very interested in twice. I don't think Dalvin Tomlinson, I think that's probably the best pick of the draft they made in the second round, but you've added a guy who basically seems like he's an exact clone of Jonathan Hankins, may not give you much in terms of a pass rusher, which is what we thought they were looking for. Obviously, the pick that's going to define this draft, Davis Webb at 3, Gallman at 4, seems like a solid back, but I don't think he's a game breaker. 5th round pick, Avery Moss, baggage on off field, has some upside. And the 6th round pick, to me, after looking into it, seems like a guy, Adam Bisnawati, a lineman from Pitt, has promise, but I don't think he's necessarily going to be able to help this team in year one. So last year they drafted 6 players, and all of them played a significant role, and 5 of them might start in week 1 in Dallas. I look at this draft, and I only really see 2 guys, Engram and Tomlinson, I think are going to be starters or equivalent to starters in week 1. So, it's a draft I think is a lot more projection for the future than maybe last year's did.
It's interesting, and we've debated this, Dan, about these drafts, and should it be for this year? Should it be you look forward? But off of what James just said, the fact they didn't address the offensive line till the end of the draft. I mean, I think a lot of the conversation on the Giants right now to start this week is not who they brought in, but what they didn't do. What the positions they didn't address, the players they passed up. What was your takeaway as you watched the whole thing unfold, starting with Engram in the first round?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot like James said, or like you said, the offensive line, the lack of an offensive lineman early in the draft is what is going to be the biggest takeaway from this draft for me. I don't have as much of a problem with the players they took as James did. Like Engram, I think that they may have been able to trade back and get him. There's also reports that they couldn't, that the Falcons, the teams are trying to move up. I just don't know that he is such an important piece that you have to take him at 23. I think he will step in and help the offense, but I don't think it's, what he brings to the table is a dire need for this team right now, whereas I think maybe you trade back a few spots, you can get an offensive lineman, whether it be Cam Robinson or Ryan Ramczyk, or even roll the dice on a linebacker like Reuben Foster. Like there are options, later in the first round, pick up a few other mid-round picks, so that way you can take the Davis Webb pick in the 3rd round and also get a 3rd rounder who can help you. So I think that's why Jerry Reese never trading back, to me, is a major handicap, because he says we want to take the picks. We don't want to move up. So he obviously values the picks. We'll get a few more. Like that's always a good thing. You want to, to quote Ben McAdoo, he always says you want to get a lot of, at bats at the plate. Well, giving yourself more picks does that. And at 23, when Garrett Bowles just went off the board and Jared Davis went off the board, 2 of the 3 picks before they were on the clock, 2 guys that they definitely are interested in, I think you can afford to slide back, and maybe you get Evan Engram at 27 or 26, whoever was in that, in the trade talks at that point. And even if you can't, I still think you're going to get a good player there, and like I said, more shots, later on in the draft. So I don't think Engram's a bad pick, because I think he will step in, be a good player. I think he adds a dimension to this offense sorely lacked last year. But it is going to be interesting to see how he fits, because he's not O.J. Howard and maybe not even David Njoku as far as being a well-rounded guy. So he's basically a big slot receiver, in my opinion. I don't think he's a tight end. You're going to list him as a tight end, but he's the same size as Brandon Marshall. So he's not a tight end. He's not a blocker. He's willing to block, but you just can't put him on the line and ask him to go block a defensive end or probably even an outside linebacker. So while he's a useful player, I don't think he was a huge need for this team where they're at right now. Now, he definitely could develop, and obviously the draft isn't just about this 1 year. But again, my biggest takeaway is not getting an offensive lineman to the 6th round, and I think maybe we can get more into that because I think it was really a problem with the whole offseason. And then 2, I just think trading back has value in the spot that they were in, and again, we'll see how things play out, but some of these offensive linemen that went early 2nd round, I think could have helped the Giants.
Let's take a plate about Reese now a couple years in a row, right? Like the Giants sit there and watch the players they seemingly want, or some of them go off the board, as Dan was just mentioning, they go right before the Giants at 23, and then they just sit where they are and take a player instead of maneuvering. It feels like Jerry Reese can't read the room, can't read what's happening around him, and just reacts in the 10 minutes he has to make a pick. And doesn't mean the player he picks is poor. Like last year, everyone was mad at Jerry Reese or questioning Jerry Reese, and Eli Apple looks like he's going to be a good player. That could happen again with Evan Engram. It's kind of the perception of how they landed on Evan Engram.
Yeah, I mean, look, actually, all things considered, my immediate reaction from when they made the Apple pick compared to when they made the Engram pick, I'm a little bit more confident that Evan Ingram's going to be an impact player. I don't think my issue with the pick is not the player. Evan Engram is, by all indications, a first-round talent, considered by a lot of teams. I mean, I think some teams had him as a second-round guy. One scout who Mark Eckel, our colleague, talked about him as a third-round guy. But look, I think he can be an impact player. He's fast as heck. He's going to open a seam up. He's a weapon for the Giants. But I just look at the Giants. Did they really need another wide receiver? And, yes, down the road, I mean, look, I think one of the big takeaways I have from this draft was Brandon Marshall's probably going to be here for a year because there's really no reason to have Marshall and Shepard and Beckham and Ingram all together long term. And which of those guys is different from the other in terms of age? And so, all right, so that's probably what we're looking at here, and that's fine. I disagree with Dan. I think this was a luxury pick. Get back to the trade down thing. Peter King, MMQB, had this. Everyone's talking about it. He was embedded in the Niners war room this weekend for the draft. It says in there that the Niners called the Giants about 23 because they were trying to trade back in to get Reuben Foster from Alabama. Giants said, we're staying pat. Now, they eventually worked their way down the line. They gave Seattle the number 34 pick right at the top of the 2nd round and their 4th-round pick, which I think was 111, for 31 to get in to pick Foster. If they had traded up to 23 with the Giants, you'd have to think that they would have had to give up 67 in the 3rd round and 34 at least to get to 23. Maybe they also throw in 111, and if Jerry Reese is driving a hard bargain and he tries to make them think that they're going to lose Reuben Foster if they don't get in the draft, he does get 111. So where would the Giants be better off? Taking Ingram at 23 or having 34, 67, maybe 111 in addition to 55 and 87?
Yeah, I think, off the top of my head, I mean, I think the answer is the latter. They'd be better off having those picks and not having Evan Engram, and that could be now that could change. Like if Evan Engram becomes a major weapon for this team, regardless of who the quarterback is, which we'll get to in a second, over the next 5 to 10 years, I mean, we won't talk about this. It won't be like, oh, they could have traded down, and they didn't have to have Evan Engram, but. Right now, considering, like you said, Mark Eckel, or the scout he talked to, and kind of the perception of the team and the player and what else they needed, yeah, I think I would have traded down. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, no, like I said, that's definitely – and it's something that Reese hasn't done in 11 years, which is just really amazing. I mean, not to always compare people to Bill Belichick because he's obviously, operating in just a different level in kind of every sense. But, I mean, he trades picks constantly. I just think it's part of how to do the job well, because the other thing you do if you just stay put, you put a lot of pressure on yourself because listen, we have 1 pick in the 1st round, 1 pick in the 2nd round, 1 pick in the 3rd round. If those guys are flops, there's really no reinforcements there. It's just once in a while. I'm not saying all the time, and I'm not saying when you have a top 10 pick you should trade out, but there are definitely certain spots where it just behooves you to just pick up a few more spots because you're not going to nail all 7 picks every year. So give yourself 9 picks one year. Give yourself, in some years maybe it's 6 because you traded around. But I just think that there's just kind of inherent value in having more picks, and I don't think that that's really a complicated thing to wrap your mind around. Just the more shots you take, because it's a crapshoot. Your scouts can do the greatest job in the world, and you end up with guys who flame out in a year or two in some instances. So I just think that there's value in adding picks. I think the spot they were in at 23. Yeah, there was a lot of value, again, because you wouldn't have to trade back that far. You would have picked up some more picks. But again, if they love Evan Engram and are convinced that he's a game changer. And that's definitely possible. It's hard to really criticize him too harshly because, again, they know where they think he's going to fit in their offense. He's going to have a role this year. So I still will think that there was probably more value in trading back. But at the end of the day, they didn't pick a stiff. They got a guy who can help this team. And really, that's the end goal of any draft, obviously, is just to get players to help your team. How you go about doing it varies team to team. So it's, I disagree with not trading down. But again, if they are so convicted that he is the guy, then hey, we'll see what happens next year and obviously going forward.
Yeah, coulda, woulda, shoulda with all these kind of things. That will be there now and forever. But like the one thing we will know eventually is, can Evan Engram play and how well he could play, and that's what we'll talk about. And I'm with you, Dan. I mean, the more times you throw at the dartboard, the better chance you have. The Giants, and we'll get to the second round pick. We'll circle back around, but we've gone long enough without addressing maybe the biggest thing the Giants did. It wasn't the first round pick. It wasn't the second round pick. But for all intents and purposes, it probably was the most important pick for the future of the Giants. Third round, Davis Webb out of Cal. James, I remember seeing some thoughts during this draft process that maybe he could sneak in the end of the first round. He ends up going in the third round to the Giants. And just listening to Jerry Reese after that pick was made, and I was kind of comparing and contrasting in my head what they said about Ryan Nassib all those years ago when they took him. And it was just totally different. Like, I remember them saying they hope Ryan Nassib never plays for them, which he basically didn't. And this was kind of almost a time frame they were giving. Sit behind Eli for 2 to 3 years. But, clearly they were talking about Davis Webb as a real chance to be their future quarterback and to be the successor to Eli Manning. What did you think about the pick and the perception you're gaining in the last couple of days from hearing about Davis Webb here?
The pick is fine, in my opinion. I think that the only thing I would say about the pick, and this is not – we talked about Nate Peterman a lot in the past, but the value – I do think the Giants, there are going to be some questions about, the value they got, just because we then saw that Dobbs didn't go till the 4th. Peterman didn't go to the 5th. I believe Brad Kaya stayed on the board until the 6th. So we're never going to know this, but I would be curious to know, how high – of a gap, how much higher up the board was Webb for the Giants compared to Peterman and Dobbs and Kaya? Because if it was pretty close, then the Giants are kind of opening themselves up for a little bit of criticism, because they probably could have gotten Nate Peterman in the 5th round or Dobbs in the 4th round. I understand why the Giants wanted Webb. He's 6'5", and he's got a rocket for an arm. I think every football coach in the history of the sport has seen a 6'5" quarterback with a big arm and looked at that's what a quarterback's supposed to look like. That's what Davis Webb looks like. This is not a Ryan Nassib situation. For some reason, Giants fans are really bent out of shape about this pick. I don't get it. This is a guy who has all the physical tools. You have time to develop him. He doesn't have to be ready yet. And moreover, Eli is 36, coming off a mediocre season. You hope that he's got 3 more good years left in him. You don't know that for sure. And where would you rather be with the Giants? Have Eli have a bad 2017 to follow up a not so good 2016, and he shows a physical decline, and all of a sudden they have to make some big move to try to trade up the board and get one of those quarterbacks, and they have a lot of pressure on them? Or would you rather them be able to gradually ease into this thing and have the option on hand a year early rather than a year late? That's what I think the Giants have to look at. They had to get a quarterback this year because you've got to start the ball moving. They got one. Now they've got to develop this guy. And look, if they after a year don't like what they see in practice and they don't think he's the guy and they think they misfired, this team has blown basically every third-round pick they've made in the last decade. They've had no problem cutting these guys. They cut DeMontre Moore because he got into a fight over headphones. I don't think the Giants are going to sweat, misfiring on a third-round pick if they have to go get another quarterback in a year in the draft.
Before we get to Dan here, James, I want you to address, because I saw your tweet, I guess it was Friday night, because the report came out, or a rumor came out, the Giants tried to trade up for Mahomes in the first round, which I was out over the weekend and someone said that to me, and I remember I saw your tweet the night before, and I was like, I'm not sure if that's true. So what did you hear on that? Was there anything to that? Because that would have been interesting, because that would have changed the entire conversation, right? Like, you draft a quarterback in the third round, it's one thing, and he's going to develop, and this is now their quarterback of the future, maybe. If they trade up for Mahomes, that opens a whole can of worms. What did you hear?
From people I talked to, and these are people that would know, absolutely not. They did not try to trade up for Pat Mahomes. Now, I will say this. Every NFL team, they call the teams ahead of them, and behind them just to kind of get a feel for the room and what's going on and who might be open with what. So I'm sure the Giants probably called somebody high up on the board. New Orleans at 11, Cleveland at 12, Arizona at 13. I mean, I'm sure they called someone. But one, I don't think it was ever serious. Two, if they wouldn't trade up a couple spots to get O.J. Howard, I really don't think Jerry Reese is going to go all in and deliver a huge haul to someone to get Patrick Mahomes. And three, if you read the Peter King MMQB piece, the Niners didn't even know who the Bears were trying to get until the pick was announced. So if the Bears won't tell the 49ers that they're going up to get Mitch Trubisky and it's a one-spot hop, why would the Giants call the Browns and say, hey, we want Patrick Mahomes? What do you think the Browns are going to do? They're going to go run to every team in the NFL and say, Giants want Pat Mahomes. What do you want to give us? So, one, they didn't try to trade up for Pat Mahomes. And two, if they were trying to trade up for Pat Mahomes, which they weren't, there's no way anyone would have known they were doing that until the card was in and Goodell was reading the name on TV.
Yeah, it seemed bogus. The whole thing seemed a little maybe sensationalized, the idea of them doing that. They do land Davis Webb. Dan, I remember when we talked about the idea of the Giants drafting a quarterback, which we've done a lot over the past couple months. I think you and I were kind of on the same page of if you do it in the first round, it creates a whole can of worms. If you do it later, you could probably develop him, and you can do that type of thing without causing some sort of story that's going to hover over the 2017 Giants. Do you think they pulled that off with the third-round pick? Do you think that was a kind of a sweet spot to take a quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, I got to be consistent. I said I was adamantly opposed to taking a quarterback in the first round. I was similarly opposed to taking one in the second round. Pretty much any point after that, I was okay with it because, I mean, again, you do need to eventually start to look at Eli's successor. Now, could they have waited and get some of those guys James said a little later? Sure. Could they have waited till next year? Absolutely. Those are kind of the two alternatives. But again, it's the same deal. If a team likes a guy, you have to pick him. You can't just say, oh, well, maybe we can wait and get Nate Peterman in the fifth round. If you think Davis Webb is a significantly better quarterback and he's there in the third round, you have to take him. So I can't kill him for that. I mean, they supposedly had him even higher on their board. So in their opinion, they got good value. I think most people would say it's good value. I mean, there was buzz. He could be a late first-round pick. So getting him at the end of the third round definitely looks like good value. And again, like I said, first two rounds, I would have had a big problem with it because you want Engram and Tomlinson to step right in. I mean, Jerry Reese said usually you want your first three picks to step right in. Obviously, Webb isn't going to do that. But I think at the third round, you're getting to a point where less of a sure thing, especially with the Giants' track record, that those guys are going to step in and be immediate contributors. So now it's really on Ben McAdoo. I mean, he's kind of developed this reputation for his work with quarterbacks. He inherited Aaron Rodgers and Eli Manning well into their careers when he started working with them as a quarterbacks coach and offensive coordinator and obviously head coach. Not that tough of an assignment to inherit those two guys. So let's see. This is obviously a handpicked McAdoo guy, even though oddly he didn't speak to him during the process. Clearly saw enough on film and apparently liked what he heard from the scouts and just knowing Webb's background. I mean, he is, as everybody who came to the podium said, he's a coach's son. There's no questions about sort of his dedication to football. He lives and breathes it and watches film. So all that seems to be a good sign that he is going to be receptive to what McAdoo referred to as quarterback school that he's going to spend the next couple of years in, obviously. So like I said, it's kind of on McAdoo to develop this guy because their futures are definitely going to be tied together. But getting him in the third round, can't knock it because, again, you do need to start looking to the future, who's going to replace Eli. And as James said, maybe it won't be Davis Webb. Maybe in 2 years they find someone in the second round they like more. That's fine. I mean, they really haven't taken, aside from Nassib, any quarterbacks in Eli's tenure of any significance. So it's not the worst idea to just bring one in every couple of years, especially as he's getting up there. So I'm fine with the pick overall.
James, do you think there's pressure now on Eli Manning for the first time? Not that he doesn't put pressure on himself, but pressure because there's actually someone on the depth chart behind him that people inside the Giants actually believe in. Like, this is the first time they've ever had anyone behind him that you could foresee actually being the Giants' starting quarterback. Eli wasn't great last year. Do you think he's going to feel some pressure now?
I'm sure he will. I mean, I think that, McAdoo kind of came out and said basically that he doesn't believe that most rookie quarterbacks are capable of being the number two, the main backup in the NFL in their first year. So as of now, I tend to think that Eli's a starter, obviously, and Davis Webb's the third guy who's probably inactive most Sundays. And, Geno and Josh Johnson are going to battle it out to be the backup. But if Eli has a poor – I don't think look, there's going to be some element of the fan base that if Eli struggles this coming season is going to want Davis Webb to play. My guess is that the Giants are not going to entertain that at all, and that Eli will be the guy, barring injury, all the way through. But if Eli has another kind of so-so season, and we get to 2018, and Webb's been in the in the league for a year, and he knows the offense, I asked Ben McAdoo this on Friday night, and he basically said he doesn't care. And that's fine. He's a coach. That's a typical McAdoo answer. But people are going to want to see Davis Webb play sooner rather than later, especially if Eli isn't playing great. So at some point, there's going to be a back page calling for Davis Webb. The Giants just have to be firm in their convictions that they're sticking with Eli, because if they start to get wishy-washy, when we were in Philly before the draft, Brian Billick, I thought, said it best. If you even are entertaining or can't, without a doubt, adamantly say, we're not going to Davis Webb, then that's probably a sign that you've given up on Eli and you have to go to Davis Webb. So
yeah, it's funny, the whole thing about rookie quarterbacks not being able to play or sit for a full year. I know these situations aren't close to the same, but I remember the Eagles said the same thing last year about Carson Wentz. He was going to be inactive. 3 months later, he's starting on opening day. Now, that was a whole bunch of dominoes that fell that way. But, Dan, I always think these things move faster than coaches and GMs think they will. Like, I don't know when this switch will happen. I don't know if it will ever happen. I'm not sure what Davis Webb's going to be. But if Eli struggles, like James just alluded to, people will call for Davis Webb. And if Eli plays the whole year but finishes poorly, it feels like we'll go into next offseason with that question like, wait, is Davis Webb ready to take this job? Like, this thing probably moves faster than they said on Thursday. Do you agree with that, or do you think it will be 2 or 3 full years?
Well, I mean, the clock has definitely started, and it's not. We were talking a lot of hypotheticals here for the 3 months after the season, but now there's a guy in there that will be a potential option. It is funny when Jerry Reese first got up to the podium and was describing the Webb pick. He said something like, Eli has 2 to 3 years left, and that caught my attention. And before I could really follow up on that with him, he did say other times like, we don't know how long Eli has left. We think he's going to play at a high level for a long time, but kind of maybe slipped there. And basically, I mean, obviously he has 3 years left on his contract. So I think that's a logical kind of end date from the Giants' perspective. I think the big variable we don't know is how much communication Eli has had with the organization about when he thinks he's going to hang it up, or if they've even broached the topic, because that's got to be touchy. I can't imagine anyone in the Giants going to Eli saying, when do you plan to retire? That just seems like not the type of question you want to ask to the leader of your team, who's obviously been a high-level player for a long time, faced the franchise. So I'm curious if the alternative has happened where Eli has said, listen, guys, my contract's up in 3 years. I got a family. I'm going to just go head for the mountains, when that contract's up. I'd be surprised if that's the case, too. I'm just curious. We don't know that. No one's reported one way or another. But obviously, again, the bringing Webb in at least puts some sort of a clock on it because, I mean, listen, he's got a 4-year contract. So at some point, you'd probably want him to play during that contract to see what you have rather than just doing an asset where he sits there for 4 years and you move on. But what happens if Eli plays well the next 2-3 years? So it's really hard to tell. Obviously, it's going to have to play out in the field. But the fact that he has 3 years left on his contract makes it seem like it's pretty good odds that he's going to be the starter for 2 more seasons. I'd be very surprised if we're talking next year at this time about Davis Webb seriously, contending for the starting job. But if Eli has a bad year this year, definitely the footsteps will get a little louder. And if he struggles next year as well, then obviously it becomes much more realistic. But I think you're looking at 2 years minimum because I don't think Eli's going to drop off a cliff. They added Evan Engram, they added another weapon, so even that should help him a little bit. But definitely in 2 years, we're going to start thinking about it. I still have a hard time thinking that the Giants could ever just, bench Eli and play a kid over him or cut Eli to give Webb the shot. But, a lot can happen in 2 years where there's injuries or his play really declines and Eli just decides, he wants to hang him up. But that's a little ways down the road. I think it's at least you're looking at a 2 year window here where there's really not going to be much serious talk about, Webb playing over Eli.
Dan's right. I think that in an ideal world, they definitely get the next 2 years. And then if there's any issue, they don't have to face it until 2019. And as Jerry said, 2-3 years, who knows? Maybe Eli just decides he's done after 2 years and they do this fine. But I think you are right. These things kind of move faster than maybe everyone planned at the beginning. Look, there's no doubt in my mind, Eli Manning will, in my opinion, will never play for another team. He's going to be a Giant until the day that he retires. I just don't know how that is all going to play out. And look, if Eli gets through 3 years and he's playing great and he wants to play another 3 years, I'm sure the Giants would just sign him to a 3-year deal and go trade Davis Webb if they could. I don't and try it again. But the other guy who has a 4-year deal who's got 3 years is Ben McAdoo. So Ben McAdoo maybe didn't want to think about it, but if Davis Webb actually becomes the next quarterback, Davis Webb is going to play a big role in how Ben McAdoo's Giant tenure plays out from there on out. So Webb and McAdoo, we'll see. If McAdoo gets another 4 years after this deal expires.
Yeah, it's interesting. The clock has definitely started, and it just feels like these things always move faster than maybe anyone thinks. But the Giants trying to win now while do this on the side. It's an interesting kind of juxtaposition. Now, we really haven't touched on the second-round pick, which is obviously a guy they hope to come in and help. We'll get to the late-round picks in a few minutes. But, Dan, thoughts on the second-round pick? I mean, this is kind of – Jerry Reese has done this before. Taking Jonathan Hankins in the second round, athletic defensive tackle who they think come in and probably play right away. What's your perception of that pick?
Yeah, I mean, I did a pick-by-pick grades, and I gave this one an A. There's really nothing to dislike about it. He fills a need, talented player, big-time program, great off the field, glowing reviews. I mean, could have gone to Harvard, there's reports saying. I mean, he's that smart of a kid and that good of a student. Has some adversities overcome in his past, just everything you kind of want in a draft pick. And they were talking, and Jerry Reese and Mark Ross have obviously been doing this a long time, like one of the best combine interviews I've ever had. I mean, you got 15 minutes with these guys, and he just blew their socks off, I guess. So all that stuff is great. And like I said, going back to the football part, he is Jonathan Hankins. I mean, it's funny. They try to say he's a different player. You look at all these scouting reports. Some of them do player comparisons. I can't remember which one it was, said Jonathan Hankins. I mean, you look at the way they're described, just their physical stature, the scouting reports, they're the same player. Big, run-stuffing defensive tackle with some pass rush ability. I mean, obviously, one of my big things was I thought, Hankins was a little overrated because he didn't really rush the passer. But it was a couple years ago when he had 6 sacks. So I think if you can get that type of production from Tomlinson, that would be great. But clearly the Giants love to have kind of 2 big bodies. They have snacks already. There was thoughts, at least I thought, they might have gone for more of a true 3 technique who's going to be a little bit more of a pass rusher. But they wanted another big body. Tomlinson fills that role. For a second-round pick, I think that's, about where he was pegged. There's just really nothing, like I said, to really knock about this pick. He's going to step in and play right away. So everything about that, to me, it checks out. I think it was a good pick.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a Jerry Reese pick. Like he that's what he likes to take, and that type of guy. And it didn't surprise me at all. Like some of these picks surprised me, and Engram surprised me, and even what they did later surprised me a little bit. And no offensive lineman surprised me. That one didn't. James, of the guys they took after Davis Webb, so 4, 5, and 6, the 3 players, the running back, the defensive end, the offensive lineman, which one caught your eye the most and maybe you think could have some impact here this year?
I think the 5th-round pick, Avery Moss out of Youngstown State, obviously has a rather high-profile kind of, headline-grabbing, off-field incident where he kind of basically got banned from Nebraska's campus, which meant obviously he couldn't go to school at Nebraska or play football there. But we've talked a lot about how the Giants lack pass rush consistency behind JPP and OV. Obviously Romeo Okwara had a good year as undrafted rookie. Kerry Wynn's more of a run stuffer guy. Odigizua is a big question mark with all the stuff that was kind of been around him lately. This guy, it seems like he has the ability to be a really good pass rusher. Kind of Jerry Reese thinks he's a complete defensive end. He could be kind of that third guy. Obviously, he has to prove it. A 5th-round pick, so I mean, it's not a sure thing. And there's also the off-field character stuff, but the Giants seem pretty comfortable with it. So I look at him of the 4th through 6th round picks they made. I think he's the one guy who could have maybe the biggest impact. I think Gallman's obviously going to play, but Paul Perkins had 100-something carries in one start last year as a rookie. I don't know if you can really expect that much more out of Gallman this year.
Dan, what do you on Gallman, on the running back, the 4th-round kid? I'm reading the scouting report you guys put up on NJ.com, and some scout called him herky-jerky, quicker than fast, like a kid that can catch the ball in the backfield. You think they're done here at running back? Like, do you think what they have is enough in their mind right now? There were those rumors about LeGarrette Blount before the draft. They have Gallman, they have Paul Perkins, Shane Vereen. You think this is the Giants' backfield for this season?
It's interesting because when they first made the pick, I said, this probably rules out Blount. Jerry Reese was asked about it and kind of gave his standard, we'll explore all our options. But when I kind of look back on it, Blunt is still a different enough player from Gallman. Gallman is more of a physical downhill back than Perkins is, but he's not a huge body. I don't know that he's going to be this huge upgrade at the goal line. I think he's got some toughness and will be able to do that role if called upon. But Blunt has a very specific skill set, and assuming you'd be able to bring him in on a 1 year, maybe 2 year deal with easy to cut him after 1 year and not big money, I think I still would kick the tires there, because if you're not going to give big money, what's the worst that happens? You bring him into camp and you cut him if it doesn't work out. But that factor, the fact that they took a running back in the 4th round, probably makes it less appealing to Blunt, because he obviously is going to look at the situation, look at the roster. Wait, they just invested a 4th round pick. He's not getting cut. Perkins isn't getting cut. Vereen's probably not getting cut. So is there much of a role for me here? So he might have better options elsewhere. But I don't think it rules it out as much as I initially thought, because I think you're going to have Perkins is going to be the main first down, second down back. Vereen is going to be the third down back. There's carries for another player there. So I think Gallman is kind of maybe an upgrade on Orleans Darkwa from when you kind of read the scouting report. So I think he jumps him, obviously, and he's going to have a prime opportunity to get some carries. But I think there could definitely be a potential situation where you bring in a Blunt still, and he could still maybe jump Gallman on the depth chart. Gallman can still play special teams as a rookie. Obviously you always need depth at that position with injuries. And then if Blunt moves on in a year, he's right there to take over and have a bigger role going forward. So not as much as I thought. I don't expect it to happen, but it doesn't rule it out as much as I initially thought when they made the pick.
Yeah, and the one guy we haven't really touched on, you mentioned him a little bit, James, the offensive lineman out of Pitt they took in the 6th round. And I think just this idea, the fact that we've done 35 or so minutes on a post-draft reaction podcast about the Giants and haven't talked about offensive linemen being selected, that's, I think, the thing that will kind of be the lasting impact of this until we get to the season, and until or if this offensive line produces at a decent level. Unless that happens, we'll circle back to this, right? I mean, that will be the kind of the lasting thing and the big question, that the offensive line through free agency and through the draft really wasn't addressed.
Yeah, and I think another thing fans have to remember is look ahead to after this season. Weston Richburg, unrestricted free agent. Justin Pugh, unrestricted free agent. So the Giants, I think if you look at the Giants' offensive line as a whole, and this Adam Bisnowaty from Pitt seems like he has the potential to be a starting right tackle in the league. For a 6th round pick, I think that Giants could definitely have done worse. From what I've read, it might be a little bit optimistic to hope that he's going to be a major contributor as a rookie. It seems like he's kind of raw and needs to kind of refine his game. But in terms of, I get what the Giants are saying in the sense of, well, we've added DJ Fluker, we re-signed John Jerry, we hope we think Hart's going to make a big step forward. We got the Bisnowaty kid in the fold now, but they really don't have anyone who on paper is a serious contender to take Eric Flowers' job, which means this is all relying upon Eric Flowers making a major leap in year 3. Maybe the Giants are right and he will, and it'll all be fine. But if he doesn't, you're right, we're going to come back to this draft. How did the Giants not get an addition in the draft? How they not get something in free agency? And then if you lose Richburg or Pugh or both, then it's really going to look bad going into the 2018 season. So the Giants, they seem to be comfortable that the whole world has this perception of their offensive line that's incorrect, and they know what's right, and they know that they're okay in the building. We'll see how it plays out. This seems to be their gamble, that they're going to be able to get through with this line. I don't know if it's going to be the right gamble, but we'll find out.
We will. That's the gamble.
Yeah. Joe, I got to jump in on this one, because this is my biggest thing that I've been banging this drum all off season, and now the draft is done. And even Jerry Reese went on Sirius Radio this morning and said that he's very confident that Flowers and Bobby Hart are going to develop. And listen, I've heard the age thing with Eric Flowers a ton. He is only 23 years old. That'd be younger than Garrett Bowles, the same age as a lot of these guys coming out. He could have been in this draft class if he stayed at Miami for his final 2 years. All of that sounds great. We've seen him play in the NFL for 2 years. At what point does the light just magically turn on? He didn't get any better. He played at a big-time college program, had issues there, came in, played probably sooner than he should have, or at least at left tackle, and had a tough rookie year, injury, all that stuff. I think everyone was willing to give him a pass, but they didn't try to upgrade the position, bring in any competition last offseason. But again, it was, hey, he's a young player, he's going to develop. Had a second year, no development. You could argue he took a step back. Now you come into this offseason, I understand that it wasn't a great offensive line class, and I understand that free agents were getting paid crazy money. at the end of the day, though, don't you have to look at your own roster and say, our guys aren't very good, so maybe these other guys that we're so down on would still represent an upgrade or at least some competition. Like, I still think, and I know it would have been tough maybe financially, I would have done everything I could to get Andrew Whitworth in here somehow. And I know people look at the Rams contract he signed. It looks like more money on paper. I think they can get out of that in 2 years and not be quite as much of an investment as it looks like. But all right, maybe you couldn't get him. I still think there had to be a move. There had to be a veteran that you could bring in to at least push Flowers. Maybe Flowers, it pushes him. All indications he's working hard this offseason, but nothing pushes you quite like a guy who came in to take your job, and then you got to fight him off, and maybe you do a little extra work or whatever it is that'll finally get him to realize, some of this potential that made him a top 10 pick. But yeah, that's just the thing. I can't get my mind around it. They determined the free agent class wasn't good. They determined the draft class wasn't good. Well, your guys aren't very good. So it's something has to give. I mean, there's not a ton of Pro Bowlers just waiting on the market, and there's not a ton of stud tackles that are going to be there at 23. But I still think you need to address it and just make some competition. Because, again, going into this season with Eric Flowers and Bobby Hart as your tackles again, for all the upgrades they've made, Brandon Marshall, Evan Engram, some of the things they've done on defense, that could still doom your season again. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to make the team go 4-12 because obviously they have a lot of talent. They're a playoff team with those guys last year. But if you want to get to that next level, I still think having glaring weaknesses as the core position to protect your passer can really doom a team. So as you can tell, it's a rant I've been kind of building up to for a while. But it's amazing to me that they've just basically decided that Eric Flowers is going to be the guy because we can't find anything better. Case closed, and let's just cross our fingers and hope he gets better in year 3. It's a huge gamble to me. If it pays off, listen, nobody will eat more crow than me because obviously I've been kind of opposed to that idea. So if it works out, then they are brilliant because they were able to draft Evan Engram and not get an offensive lineman. They were able to add Brandon Marshall and re-sign JPP instead of getting an offensive lineman. So it's kind of a big boom or bust thing. So it's going to be fascinating to see if he is able to take that step in his 3rd year, because if he doesn't, it's going to be the focal point for Jerry Reese for a long time. I think a lot of fans will be very upset because this is a team that's on the verge of contending for a Super Bowl, and that seems like the Achilles heel, and they just didn't address it.
Well, I think that's the big thing, and we'll wrap with this. I want a quick answer from both of you. I think I already know Dan's, but a quick answer from both of you, because I think this is the whole thing. Like, if this was Eli's 4th year in the league, you could always say, all right, they'll address it next year, and they're building this thing, right? But the window's closing, and they already started closing it themselves by taking Davis Webb in the 3rd round. That's the whole thing here. So based on what the Giants did last year, James, based on signing Brandon Marshall, based on where I think they are, and I think Vegas probably will agree when the season opens up, I'd imagine the Giants look at themselves as a team that could go out and realistically compete to go win the Super Bowl next year. I'm sure that's what they believe when they walk into training camp. So quick answer from both of you. We'll start with James, then Dan. Can the Giants compete to win the Super Bowl with Eric Flowers and Bobby Hart at tackle?
Yes.
Okay, Dan?
But
very quick.
Yeah, I mean that's
well. No, look. I'm not saying that's ideal. And look, I don't think the Giants are going to win the Super Bowl. I don't even know if this team's going to make the playoffs, just because I think the schedule is more difficult than it was last year. And I know they went 11-5. I didn't think they were an 11-5 team. I watched them for 5 months. Yes, I mean, I think they can if Eli's going to get rid of the ball in 2 seconds. I think, you can work around anything. And right now, I look at this team, and that's really the only major area they have. I think they've shored up everything else for the most part. And I think having 2 big guys like Marshall and Ingram is going to help in that front, because I just thought, Victor Cruz just did not give them what they need on the outside. So, yes, they can do it. I don't think it's going to be easy, and it would be a heck of a lot easier if you actually had a proven left tackle or a proven right tackle, but I don't think that's going to preclude them from winning the Super Bowl or contending for the Super Bowl. But at the same time, I think it also could create a big mess. So I'll say tentatively, yes, they can contend with those guys as your right tackle and your left tackle, but they have to make a major step forward, or else the Giants are really in trouble.
Dan, May 1st, can the Giants win a Super Bowl with the tackles they have right now?
Yes, and you might not expect that answer after my rant to the previous
No, I didn't.
question.
I didn't.
Yes, because listen, no team is perfect. Every team is gonna have holes. My issue is that these are, especially left tackle, that's a super important place to have a hole at. So I think that's going to be a detriment. But at the end of the day, this team is probably better than it was, at least on paper, than it was last season. You didn't have any real significant losses. I mean, again, I think they should have upgraded at left tackle or right tackle or somewhere on the offensive line, but they didn't have any really major losses. They filled the Hankins void, and you added quality players. Marshall's going to help. Red Ellison's going to help. I mean, he's getting a little overrated in my opinion, but I think he's better than what they had, and Engram's going to help. So there's plenty of pieces here to say that this is a good team. I agree with James. Tough schedule, but again, they did go 11-5. You get into the dance, anything can happen. Obviously Eli has shown that. So I think if they don't win, I would not be surprised if the lack of offensive line upgrades is the reason. I think the defense will be very good again and again. I just touched on it. They have more skilled players. They obviously still have Odell. So there's a lot of pieces on offense that are going to make this should be a better offense than it was last year. So I think they can absolutely compete for a Super Bowl. I just think that if they'd shored up left tackle, I'd feel a lot better about it. I know it wouldn't have been easy to do. Maybe you wouldn't have been able to sign Brandon Marshall or Red Ellison, whatever it may be. They can definitely compete for a Super Bowl. I would just feel a heck of a lot better if they weren't just crossing their fingers and hoping two young tackles who haven't really shown much all of a sudden get better.
Yeah, I'm more skeptical than you guys, and part of it too is I watched the first round play out, and I watched Derek Barnett go to the Eagles. I watched Jonathan Allen go to the Redskins. I watched Taco Charlton go to the Cowboys, and I'm saying, well, it's just these teams have improved in their pass drafts, and the Giants haven't improved in their offensive line. It's going to be interesting. The Giants draft a quarterback. They draft a weapon, we'll call Evan Engram, defensive tackle that probably could play right away. So some good, some questions, and a whole lot to watch for over the next couple of weeks. And guys, we'll be back doing one of these podcasts soon. Great work at NJ.com for the draft. We read everything you guys did, and get some rest. I know it was a long weekend.
You got it, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, I'm probably about to go take my post-draft nap. See you in about 5 hours.
Yeah, I think you guys deserve it. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you for listening to episode 91 of Talk is Cheap. We'll be back soon on NJ.com.